Great to see you all. Let me just quickly look at the side nervously to check that this is all in fact working, which it should be. And hoping that it is, and hoping that you can see me. I'm just going to wait for another minute. Can you see me? It says that it's streaming. Boom, 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 boom. Good, good, good. There I am. Okay. Now you know what? I did something with the settings tonight to make it look like I was to improve the latency. Okay, that's good. I'm sorry, I got a little bit freaked out because my software was behaving oddly. Boom, 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 boom. Let's get back to that. So good to see you all. Welcome to Tokyo Tonight 2. My name is Simon. Hope you're having a great year. I've been doing some things this week, as you might have noticed. I've got a few updates, got a bunch of news stories to talk about, and yeah, boom, 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 boom. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining. So yeah, I've been doing, I guess it's the New Year's resolution season. January is generally a really quiet time on YouTube, but it's a nice chance to take a look at all the things that I can do. And I always look at what I do. The thing about New Year's resolutions is to not create, not set yourself up for failure. So, you know, to take a look at the things that I'm doing and what I can add, but be really realistic about what's achievable, that I can do better. And yeah, I had, well, maybe a couple of updates. Let me go through the updates first. So, sorry, I'm thinking 10 different thoughts at once at the moment. I've got to talk about the shirt, but let's come back. So, and New Year's, I talked about this before. I realized that over Christmas, when I started going back to watching a lot more YouTube than I've watched in a long time, and downloading a lot of YouTube videos and wanting to catch up and watch as many YouTube videos as possible on the train, I realized I've got a tendency that when I'm wanting to catch up on YouTube videos, I will skip over videos like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, certainly an hour, and I will skip towards watching videos shorter than 10 minutes generally when I'm going through trying to catch up lots of videos and see what's going on. When I'm doing something where I'm happy to listen for longer, and live shows are, I think, good for this, I'll click on the 1 hour videos and stuff like that. And it occurred to me from that, this live series is all made basically in segments talking about different stories. So I thought it'd be really easy to take the different portions of the show and cut them out, at least in post 2 or 3 standalone stories each week, which means that for people that aren't familiar and are a bit intimidated about watching a 1 hour recording, can still pick out and they can learn about the show. And you know, if there's content in here which people find interesting, it might make that a little bit more accessible. So I did that this week with 3 videos. I carved out 3 sections from this video during last week, and I posted them. The one thing, there have been a couple of barriers to me doing this in the past. The biggest one was, although I've got fantastic Adobe Premiere editing software on my computer, I just never spend any time in front of my computer. But I resolved that this must be easy to, there must be some way to do this where I can download the recording of this video and move it onto my iPhone and edit it in iMovie while I'm on the phone. And I kind of resolved to sit down and figure that out, and I figured that I did figure it out at the start of this week, and I discovered that iMovie, I mean, iPhones nowadays, they're just amazing. You can actually render a video, I would say, as quickly as on my desktop. You can edit it as easily, accurately. It looks great. And so yeah, when I found out, it's a little bit awkward because YouTube does not lets you download your own videos in MP4, but not directly onto your phone. In a way that you could edit. So I had to download it to my PC and then figure out a different cloud storage service to upload it to, and then download it onto my phone from the cloud storage service. It'd be really nice, YouTube, if you would let us download our own videos in a way that we can edit onto our iPhones. But in the end of the day, I got the file onto my iPhone, and in iMovie I was able to add titles and trim the video and make these segments. Figure out how to make some thumbnails and stuff like that. It was fun. It was really fast. I could do it in a couple of minutes. Actually, it was a lot less hassle than doing it at a PC, because I can do it basically when I'm on my commute to work. And I discovered these things are really easy to do. So I'm going to continue doing the show in a way that lends itself to me chopping it up later on, treating them like different sections. I'll continue incorporating all of your comments and stuff like that. But it actually, I think it means, one, I actually discovered, I realized myself, an hour, I don't watch back an hour all the time. I used to sort of watch the whole show back, but nowadays, you know, just when I'm busy, I'll watch parts of it. But this was actually a really good way for me. I would watch the videos myself a second time, and I would realize, yeah, actually that was a really good subject, and that was, I never do a perfect job of this because I don't prepare as much as if I was preparing for the specific subject, but generally I get all the key points sort of out. And I realized, yeah, this is actually pretty good, and it's a good way to help people discover the show. So I did that. Then another announcement which follows on from that, I realized that this makes editing so much easier. There's another story I need to tell you guys, which is you might recall the series that I did with Rochelle Kopp about 3 or 4 years ago called Japan Business Time. And she came to Japan, we went to the YouTube studio, we recorded a 2-hour conversation which we split up into different topics, exactly like I'm talking about just now. I cut them up, edited them, made them look nice. We called it Japan Business Time. It was awesome. It was so good that the next time that she came back to Japan, we did it again. I chopped up 12 episodes or something from that, made a second season of Japan Business Time, and we realized that the comments had so many great requests for subjects. We asked people in the second season to give us topics for a third season for the next time she comes to Japan, and sure enough, lots of topics. Rochelle came to Japan, and we got the topics. We went to the studio and we recorded another 2-hour conversation. Now what happened with that third conversation was we recorded it in the YouTube studio in Tokyo and the YouTube space, and it was a great conversation. In fact, it was a really good conversation, and I remember a couple of things happened I noticed. First thing was I realized right at the end that one of the cameras had not been working. I had 2 cameras set up and one of them wasn't working. Then I realized another one of the cameras was out of focus a lot of the time. Then on top of that, I actually lost the files. And when I finally found it I found it a couple of years ago. When I realized it was out of focus, when I looked at it in the super high resolution mode, I was like, oh god, this is just. And it was one of those things where I kind of agonized over whether I should still put it out because the content was really good. But I must admit, I got so disheartened when I looked at the content that I kind of lost my motivation for it. And every time I met Rochelle, every time she came back to Japan, she said, when are you putting season 3 out? And I kind of said, yeah, I feel really, really bad about that. I'll get round to it. And a couple of months ago I found it again, and I resolved that I was going to do it at the end of last year. But again, it was all on my computer. The files were super heavy, and I just never did it. So I actually, this week, I went and converted all the files into a mobile friendly format, into MP4. I made it into a single 2-hour file. I put it in my phone. And I just started this week editing and cutting the episodes, and the episodes are edited and they are uploaded. I've done 5 so far. I've got like a few more to go. And they're topics which you guys proposed 3 years ago. They're a long time ago, but the great thing about the subject matter, Japan Business Time, is that they're pretty timeless. They're not really time fixed. And I realized actually they still look okay, even though the focus was out on the first 2 episodes. It wasn't imperfect. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't unusable. So I've actually gone through on my mobile phone now, just in little gaps in my day, away from the computer. I've actually figured out that I can edit this and make it as well as I would have done on my computer, actually. I mean, it's just amazing what you can do on these phones nowadays. So I have basically, I'm going to go and get the videos all prepped properly with thumbnails and text and stuff like that. But 5 episodes are already up. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put Japan Business Time is going to be back. Not this week, maybe next week. I'm going to start scheduling them to go live at the same time every week. And I'm thinking I want to use the watch party feature. You know, you can release a video and set it up so it works like a live video like this, where you can have live comments beside it, and I can join in and join the actual commentary watching the video without presenting it. So I think that might be a really fun way to do it as well. So I am going to set these up as watch parties, which will be in weekly episodes, probably sometime during the week, maybe like a Wednesday evening Japan time or something like that. So Wednesday morning US. And these are really great videos, and it means I've got content for like 12 weeks. I think there's going to be 12 episodes from it, so that will be really good. And actually a lot of you guys gave us the topics for it, and they were really good. And actually now just I've been listening to each one of the episodes as I edit them. I'm like, damn, these are really good. I didn't remember the content. So I'm actually really excited about it. So Japan Business Time is back. Another announcement I mentioned last week, I am going to be on Why Come Japan with Radri this week on Thursday, which actually, that reminds me, it's actually on Friday, isn't it? It's on the 18th. And I meant to check this before the show, so I'm going to check it now. We are going to do it live, and what time are we going to do it? We are going to be live at 11 p.m. Probably 11 p.m. on January 18. There we go. January 18, 11 p.m. This Friday. I'm going to be live with Radri. I'm going to tweet that out. He's going to interview me for a change. I'll be talking about my story about coming to Japan. That should be a lot of fun. So all of those updates. Also, MyChan TV. There's been some progress. I've taken a break over the last 2 or 3 months with developing it. As I've said before, what I really need, I'm out of funds. And I need to keep the site up, and I want to continue to develop it, frankly, and so I really appreciate people have supported it. So I've been looking at the next stage, which is I want to integrate a subscription function into it for people who want to subscribe to have basically all the future features. The site's not going to change in terms of how it is for current users, but for people who want the features that they ask for to be integrated, I want to look at integrating them, but I need to pay for the development time and for the upkeep of the site. So I've taken the 2 bits of feedback that you guys have given. For me, I want to try to integrate some a payment platform. I've been looking at Amazon Pay, and I'm not sure if I'm eligible to use that. So it looks like I'll just use Stripe. But the thing is, I don't really want the pay information. A lot of you guys have given me the feedback that I should just use something like Patreon, and people would be more willing to support me for Patreon with the idea that I could use it for all my projects, including this. Rather than specifically that, like people who aren't necessarily interested in supporting MyChan TV, but are interested in supporting me, and I really appreciate that, and that gives me the idea. I'm still looking at integrating this at the moment. I'm talking to the dev again. I really want to try to keep costs down on building this out. But the idea I have is for people who just want to support MyChan, or are focused on that, I'll probably do like a, I don't know, $3 a month on MyChan and $6 on Patreon. If you follow me on Patreon for $6 or something like that, you'll get free full functionality on MyChan or something like that. I'm still looking at that at the moment and checking that it can be done, but I want to do that, and I want to make it so that basically I want to keep building out the site to make it the easiest way to keep up with YouTube subscriptions, which I'm really excited by. I'm really loving YouTube Premium, actually, with the extra functionality it has. But what I love is that it uses a standard player, which MyChan TV uses, which means I want to make my app work better with that, because in the end of the day, YouTube is all about getting you to watch what the algorithm is driving you towards, right? Basically, to get you to watch more videos that they suggest. MyChan TV is all about getting you to queue up your own logic for the videos that you see, basically bundles based on what you subscribe to. And not have them overridden by the suggested videos. So it's all about knocking out binge watching your backed up subscriptions in bundles that make sense of the type of videos that you want to watch. So yeah, I think this is really cool. And this is the way that we get to doing things like a mobile app, which will make it more fun, all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to develop that, and I'm going to keep that project going, and there will be more updates. That said, we are 15 minutes in already, and I've got a bunch of topics to talk about. So let's get into those. Let me quickly say hello. By the way, to everybody who's made us. Here's a lot of people here. Bald Billets, boy, great to see you. Who else we got here? Odie Jr., Wood indeed. Tai Nakamura, Os, yes, good to see you. The J Vlog 07, yes, salute there. Sergeant Bilko, boom, indeed to everybody. License at 45, you'll stick around for the intro of the story or two, but you took some melatonin, so I'm glad to hear that that's working for you, and enjoy your sleep. I'm glad that you came to me for the sleep assistance. Who else we got in here? We got Azumanga Davo. Good to see you, Davo. Tokyo 503, looking good. Glad to see that you can see me. I was a bit worried about that. Quid Ranked, good to see you. And indeed, we've got some of your topics actually in the new series. Well, I say new series, it's 3 years old, but it's about to go live of Japan Business Time, so look forward to that. Giancarlo Sands, great to see you. Boom, she's in Taisu, great to see you. Oh my god, well, you watch me every week, dude, but I'm glad that you're excited. I'm excited that you're excited. King Cat, good to see. Is Google listening? I hope so. Google is awesome, and I love that they are listening to everything. In fact, I'll tell you something else that I really discovered that was cool. The auto captions on Google have gotten a lot better. They were total gibberish years ago. In fact, that actually makes me think I should try to speak more clearly. It actually made me look at it and think, yeah, sometimes I got a little bit confused, but the quality has gone up a lot, so that was really, really cool. We got Sylvana Thavana, great to see you. Welcome to the show. Who else we got here? King Cat, Sunai, good to see you, Sunai. And when is the swell coming? The swell came. I was in Australia and I got some waves. It was awesome. But yes, great to see all of you guys. Let's get into the show. I've actually, so this reminds me, yes, as part of my increased YouTube watching, I wanted to share videos that I've liked this week. PDR-san, if you don't subscribe to PDR, not PDS, if you speak Japanese, although he also subtitles in captions in English, I still think this guy, he puts up videos almost every day, and I think he's the best thing on YouTube to watch. It's funny as he's got this series, like this is episode 42, where he wears different convenience store uniforms and does basically role plays of annoying customers at convenience stores. It's really, 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 really good. I mean, if you live in Japan, it's relatable. If you don't live in Japan, it's a great cultural lesson. Highly recommend PDR-san. And actually, that reminds me, boom, 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 you can see the games that I've been playing there. If I were to go into my liked videos, oh man, these are really out of date. Hang on a sec. Is that in the wrong account? Never mind. I've been catching up with a lot of YouTube videos from the community lately. I did enjoy the Taisha Jason, the Taisha Jason video from Why Come Japan, and he actually mentioned how he hasn't been on 2.5 Voyages, which I was so sure that he had been. I felt terrible when he said that, and I called up Victor right away this morning. I said, let's get Taisha Jason on. So some more good news, another announcement. Victor and I, probably next Saturday, we're going to do another 2.5 Voyages. We're both busy, we've got busy lives at the moment, but we want to try to, at least once a month, do a 2.5 Voyages show, and we want to make it meaningful getting a guest on. So it looks like we're going to be doing that with Taisha Jason next week, so look forward to that. Why? Asked Ken Cat. I don't know why. But yes. This is just interesting. This is on BBC World, and I posted this because I thought it kind of could relate to it with the thing about YouTube burnout. It really is a thing, and I've seen so many people do it, and the way that it typically happens is when you've got a passion project or a big project, that basically the burden of it kind of overwhelms you. In the end of the day, most people who do YouTube, even people who do it very seriously, it's not the most important thing in their lives. So yeah, oh, by the way, I just noticed she's enticed you talking about Rochelle, I believe, that you attended a seminar. I'm really glad you went to it. It was good, wasn't it? I mean, I went there myself. It was really, really good. So coming back though, yeah, it's a thing. I've seen so many great creators burn out, either by setting schedules that they couldn't sustain, generally from having other lives, relationships, jobs, stuff like that. Yeah, basically whenever they get to a point where YouTube becomes too much and something has to give there, they have to quit their day job, which I think, well, PDR I think does YouTube full time, but that's something that very, very few people can actually do, where they can actually switch over and favor YouTube over the other choices. Generally speaking, something breaks and it ends up being YouTube, and it happens by people, and this is what I'm really aware of. So when I'm thinking about how to make the show more watchable, I'm trying not to do it in a way, of course I could edit a video, I could record and do a video every day, and it'd be really easy to think that'd just take half an hour every day and I could do that, it'd be really easy. But when you realize it's actually tougher than you think it is, it can make you drop everything, and it happens to a lot of people, and this is what I wanted to be really careful of. Something like Japan Business Time, where I had some technical issues, some serious technical issues with the recording of it, that really, a couple of times it got me so down when I went to go edit it, that it was really, if that was all that I was doing, you know, it's the sort of thing that you end up just walking away from and being depressed and embarrassed about. And it happens, people get depression, people get this burnout from YouTube, and I've seen it happen a lot, and I can kind of relate to it. This is what I love about this show. This show, I come here at the same time, it's really low stress, I'm just talking to you guys, enjoying your comments. There's no, you guys are forgiving the weeks that I can't do it, so it's not overwhelming pressure, and it's easy to do. So I appreciate that you guys let me do that, and it's because I continue doing this every week that I can continue doing, you know, I can try out these other projects, including coming back and picking up these projects that have kind of been stalled for a long time. So I really do appreciate that. While we're talking about YouTube as well, this came up this week, where there is actually a YouTube channel called Creator Insiders, which is actually YouTube itself. They've started this kind of vlog channel, which is where they give news on technical updates and all sorts of stuff. I have to blow my nose, I'm sorry, this happens every week right at this time, this is really weird. I haven't had to do this today, so I apologize, give me 1 minute. Ah, God. So yes, YouTube has this channel called Creative Insider, or Creator Insider channel. And it's got it's got YouTube stuff where they basically announce all the new beta features, all the new studio features, and it's kind of cool actually. I keep it in my subscriptions feed, and it keeps you up to date with the news, and it really represents the way that YouTube itself has changed, where, you know, they used to be very detached from the actual creation. I always thought that this is exactly the sort of thing that they should do. And there's actually, not this one, the update video before this, the general weekly, there's a staffer from YouTube who records these vlogs at home where he gives all these YouTube updates. And his kid walks into his office while he's recording this vlog, giving all the YouTube updates, and you don't see the kid, but you hear the door open, and he's like, "Dude, I'm working here." In the room, you can hear the tension as there's a silence in the room, and he's looking angrily, obviously, at his kid, calling his kid, "Dude, I'm working." It's kind of funny. I could never actually say that to anyone in my house that I'm working when I'm doing a vlog. I guess YouTube is the only place that you can actually do that, and the kid kind of backs out of the room. It's kind of cool. But this channel, yeah, they've got lots of actually really useful information. I'm not like a hardcore YouTuber, but I do like to try to keep up with what's going on. So they did a really helpful help video on how the algorithm works with profanity and bad language, and what sort of bad language will affect your monetization. So they actually got some stuff from the monetization team, and they explained the words and that will get you not monetized, and where, like if you put in the title or in the beginning of the video, basically where the most prominent parts are. And they say all the words that you're not allowed to say. Well, almost. They don't exactly say them. They put them up on the screen in the middle of the video, and this becomes the screen, the thumbnail for the video. This is the best. This is a YouTube produced video, and that is the thumbnail. And you can see down the bottom of the screen. They don't read them up, and there's actually words there that are clearly missing. But I thought that was quite fun. It was quite fun, actually enlightening. They point out I could drop in F-bomb right now. I'm kind of deep into the video, and it's not in the titles. It's not, you know, it's not like I am ranting and swearing, or, you know, the whole time. If you're using like racial epithets or really strong language in the beginning, the title or something like that, the chances are you'll be demonetized. But yeah, if you just say an occasional casual swear word, that generally shouldn't affect you, apparently. Yes, F-bomb. I mean, and you know, I actually don't normally hesitate, but now I'm feeling self-conscious about it. That's very well done, Sergeant Bilko. Perfect. So it's an interesting video if you want to know how YouTube works, and I found that kind of funny. So I mentioned I started cutting up. I did 3 videos this week, which were basically cutouts from last week's show, and I'm going to do this again this week if I have content worth cutting out. I don't really have that at the moment, obviously. Oh man, and I actually have to take a minute here to blow my nose again. I'm sorry, this could interfere with making separate videos. Ugh. Dang nabbit. Okay, so I made a video, a segment in the show last week where I was talking about, right at the end, about this OECD quality better life index, and how Japan ranked compared to other countries, and the surprising results in terms of how Japan ranked equal to New Zealand. And kind of related to that, I suppose, there were some news stories this week, just on stuff about life in Japan. This one was kind of interesting. In Tokyo, and which stations is it? I think it's Shinjuku and Tokyo Station. Shinjuku, Tokyo, and Shinagawa. You may discover if you go in there, they have these pop-up, I guess they used to do this sort of thing in phone booths, but now these are like Wi-Fi work booths, where I guess if you're out and about and working, if you're a tourist as well and you need a Wi-Fi connection, you can actually use these mini boxes as like little offices that exist in these train stations. This was just kind of cool. Apparently, so what has it got? It's actually got a free Wi-Fi, a desk, a monitor, and USB outlets. So yeah, you can pretty much go in there and hook up even to an external monitor and get work done. You do have to create an account to be able to use the feature, to be able to use them. But that's actually kind of cool. I suppose you can do this in Japan because they won't get vandalized right away, which you might expect in other places. I suppose that you're also probably accountable when you're using it. Yeah, that's super cool. Anyway, that's kind of convenient that it's popping up in Shinagawa, Tokyo, and which are basically the main commuting hubs, Shinjuku, Tokyo, and Shinagawa stations, and that's pretty cool. Now this is a story that I noticed in Japanese. There's basically, we've recently just changed the immigration laws to formally recognize the idea of housemaids and so on, that companies can sponsor people. That it used to be that you had to be like a professor or banker or high skilled professional to be actually to be granted a visa to come into Japan. And so the idea of having, as you have in like Hong Kong and Singapore and other places, where you have, for example, maids and caregivers and farm workers from other countries, Japan's never actually recognized visa categories for this. This is all based after World War II, when Japan itself was a struggling country, and when the Americans tried to bring in their Filipina housemaids and so on, the Japanese government said, no, we want you to use Japanese. So apparently the only people who were actually allowed to sponsor visas were like ambassadorial staff, high-ranking U.S. military, and everyone else had to pay low-wage, struggling, impoverished Japanese people. It was the 1950s. They've just opened the rules on this, changing this. This was partly actually going back. There was a news story where there was a female executive, I believe from Goldman Sachs in Japan, an American, who said it's outrageous that she can't have a Filipino au pair or someone in Japan. And the government changed the laws within a couple of months to basically allow this, to allow other people from other Asian countries to come to Japan and work as house cleaning staff. The result of this is that there are companies which have house cleaners, but for example, they've always generally been elderly Japanese ladies, and they've been quite expensive. And now they've hired these the same sort of maids who would work in other countries around Asia. They've got all of this staff, so this is I guess it's good for the people who are coming here who want to save money to send back home, and it's good for Japanese that it makes these sort of services more widely available. However, the companies that have wanted to make a big deal about how great this is and to advertise their services, they have advertised kind of in a bit of an awkward way in Japanese. I saw this in Japanese, and it's good that Rocket News or Sora News here actually covered this in English, so I can share it with you guys. And by the way, the link for all of this is below in the video description to the magazine, so you can get all of these links. They said that the great thing about having foreigners as housemates is that you don't have to be considerate towards them. They're just foreigners. They can just let them go around. The idea that, and immediately a bunch of people started spewing over this. You can kind of, even Japanese people, because it basically said you don't have to be considerate towards them. I always get annoyed at the idea how sometimes Japanese people, they spend their whole lives being considerate in terms of the culture requires you to pay attention to who someone is, and whether they're more senior or less senior or equal to or whatever, and how you speak to them, how your language is, how you behave. You always have to monitor that, and it's kind of annoying as a foreigner when you're following their rules. When you're following Japan's rules about this, but when Japanese see foreigners, some people think, oh, thank God, I can relax a little bit and not worry about all the rules, which sometimes can come across as they don't treat you the same way they would treat you if you were Japanese. It's like they switch off all the politeness, or they don't, they ignore you, or they talk to the person next to you, and I find that super annoying. But certainly the way that they summarize it very succinctly, they explain it in more detail later on, saying where when there's an old lady will come and clean your apartment, you'll sometimes feel like you need to be very careful around them and be careful of your language and explain things, and you don't have to worry about that kind of Japanese customary sort of the need to talk to them, the need to leave lunch out for them, all the things that Japanese sort of feel like are a hassle that would stop them using a service. They say, don't worry, they're just here, they're going to come do the job and leave, don't worry about it. It's kind of what they wanted to say, but instead of that they said you just don't have to be considerate towards them, they're foreigners. Which, honestly speaking, is kind of what they meant. So yes, the idea that just because they're foreigners, you don't treat them, you don't have to be considerate, is a little bit, unfortunately, well, this is what Japan's going to have to kind of struggle through, I guess, with the opening up of more and more foreigners coming in and the opening up of different job categories. There is this thing that that we're kind of a substitute in many ways for robots. And the idea with robots as well, Japanese love robots because you don't have to go through all the human interaction hassle that Japanese culture has, and using them as a halfway house for that is a little bit horrible. So the term kizukai is what they used, and basically there was a bit of an not just from foreigners, by the way, from Japanese as well, saying it's a bit outrageous that you're saying that you don't have to be considerate towards these people. that you don't have to use kizukai around these people. They're just lowly housekeepers, just, you know, give them the work. Yes, I guess Japan's going to have to figure out how to appropriately deal with this. I mean, truth is, a lot of people are obviously rude and condescending to housekeepers and so on all over the world. But, you know, advertising that as a benefit of the service, you know, abandons all hope of appropriate behavior. So there you go. Tai Nakamura, by the way, asked, did he miss the Radvi show with me as a guest? No, it's coming up this January the 18th, so it's this Friday that I'm going to be on that. So yes, next story. Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting, and please be considerate to your foreign housemaids and whatnot. Another thing, talking about the quality of life in Japan, a bit similar to what we were talking about last week, a survey of Japanese found that nearly half of all young Japanese women say that they hate the company that they work for. Certainly long gone are the days where people were kind of differential and self-sacrificing for their companies, but it's also kind of good that young people are not taking crap anymore either, the way that people used to, especially given that people are, you know, this is still a country where people work themselves to death, including young women. But so it's good to see that there, I suppose, in the way that there is an upswelling of not taking inappropriate crap anymore, which people have done for a long time. But the survey anyway, Shirabe, which was basically an internet portal in Japan, they did a check of 875 men and women between the ages of 20 and 89. Wow, 89, that's pretty high. And they actually asked the question, do you hate? They affirmatively asked, do you hate the question? Apparently, do you hate your company? 29.3% said yes, they hate their company. More than 1 in 4 said yeah. That's quite a lot anyway. But you look at the rates in particular for women, younger women in particular, 40% hate their companies. I suppose there is still, you do meet a lot of Japanese people. I remember when I was in my 20s and single, and you meet a lot of women, and they'd say to you up front, which I found kind of shocking, that they want to quit their jobs and get married as soon as possible because they hate their job. There are people who go out with no intention of having a career, but wanting to get out of it as soon as possible and seeing it as a burden and a hassle. My perception is that's changing quite a lot, though. The marriage rates are declining because people prefer to pursue careers and they like the independence that having a job gives them. But according to this, well, either they're in really crappy jobs that aren't meeting their expectations, or they don't, you know, or the actual point, which is that most companies are still basically not treating their junior employees correctly. I mean, certainly it's become better than it used to be, but certainly there's still the situation, particularly for young women employees, for example, where when people come to a meeting, the men in their 20s will go and sit down with notepads ready to go, and the women are expected automatically, even if they are equal rank employees to the men, to go and get the tea and so on ready, and to sort of act in that sort of role. So I can imagine it can be a drag for a lot of people, and frankly there's still that underlying sort of sexist behavior that's there. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, but even for men it's obviously a pretty high rate of dissatisfaction. Ironically, higher dissatisfaction, look at that, as they get older, 40 to 49. I guess right now it's a tough time to be in that sort of a bracket, because they're really under pressure at the moment. They're more expensive than junior people, and so they come under more pressure, I guess, over salary and you know, advancement and so on. So yeah, I guess it's tougher to be a younger woman at work and an old middle-aged man at work. Midlife crisis, I suppose. And indeed the economy is shifting at the moment. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting stat, and it's much higher. I mean, hate is a strong word, but that is the stat that they are using. So yeah, that's really interesting. Anyway, other stories that we have. Also, I mentioned last week about LGBT rights and the GAF by Hirozawa Sangin Ging. Saying that if everybody becomes LGBT, there won't be, the country will collapse. I had some comments on this video actually point out when I reposted the shortened version of this video during the week. So like, this is the 8-minute version, just taking that conversation portion out. Some people commented and they mentioned that that's not true. Technically, the bees in there, at least, they can make babies in there. So I should point out that Hirozawa, in his full statement, he actually listed, although the media has taken this term where they don't like to say dosei, or the Japanese words for homosexuality. It's a little bit too confronting, so it's kind of ironic. They use a term that's more familiar for us, but it feels more indirect for them to say LGBT is like a kind of a weird foreign anagram that means all of these things without necessarily clearly defining it. Media like to do this. So what Hirozawa said was, he said same-sex marriage, men and men, women and women. If everybody becomes like these people, the country will come to an end. And when he says these people, the media inserted in parentheses, he means LGBT. And so I translated it that way, and I kind of went along with it, where I made the gaffe myself saying, well, maybe he's got a point, although that's ridiculous. But actually, so two things on that. Some people pointed out to me in the video, no, the bees, totally, they can still have kids, right? I mean, it's not necessarily always same-sex, but the point is that Hirozawa himself was talking about same-sex, which technically means that LGBT isn't actually the right term. But anyway, yes, I got caught out on that, and I apologize. But just for an idea, I pointed out in that video how the kind of religious-based bigotry that we have in many Western countries is not there. Japan has an idea of conformity, social conformity, and is certainly considered not to be normal in Japanese culture or typical to be homosexual, but it's not exactly seen as inherently sinful or wrong either, just different. So in that respect, I think there's less resistance to the idea of changing to recognize this, and the evidence of that can be seen here in this article, where a survey by Denser of people basically found that for people in their 50s through to their 20s through to their 50s, 80%, about 78.9% or some number like that of people found recognizing. In fact, this article does it here too. It describes LGBT as same-sex, which is actually technically not, it's incorrect. But they point out that marriage recognition, basically 80%, 78.4% of people in these age groups, but from their 20s to 59, they surveyed 60,000 people. 60,000 people between 20 and 59, and found that 78.4% of them totally supported the idea of same-sex marriage, of recognizing same-sex marriage. So Japan arguably much more on board on this actually than many Western countries, which is good to see. And it's not entirely, and it's very matter of fact, which is how I believe it should be. It's good to see. So yeah, just to back up what I was talking about, that this sort of stigma, the sort of religious kind of self-justified persecution that we have, that complicates the issue in countries that have that are dominated by the sort of Middle Eastern religions, you know, Islam, Christianity, Judaism. Yeah, Japan's less hung up about this sort of thing. Buddhism, obviously, Shinto seem a little bit less hung up, and generally speaking, just people that here are not very religious. So yeah, 80% support it. So it seems like a no-brainer to recognize it. It's really just social conservatives that are kind of struggling with the idea. So the next one that I've got is yeah, I'm going to go straight to the whaling story. Well, before I do that, this is a little bit out of sequence. For those of you who yes, are coming to Japan, welcome, please come. Remember that you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. Welcome to the Hotel Tokyo. You will now have to pay a $9 departure tax for any tourist leaving the country. The idea is, when they say $9 US, it's 1,000 yen. It's basically, you know, $10 is the way I'd convert it, but everyone leaving the country, they're getting 30 million, 40 million tourists they're expecting during the Olympics, and they figure this will be a really easy way to get $3 or $4 billion extra for the coffers without having to tax Japanese people by making them pay 1,000 yen at the airport. So I'm not exactly sure how they're going to collect it, but yeah, this is just going to be a pain. I don't think it's going to stop tourists. It's not that inhibitive, but you know, again, it is going to have it's going to put a hassle, and it's going to leave a bad taste, I think, on the final step out. It's a bit of a cheap move by the government, frankly, which, in spite of the fact that they're increasing the sales tax from 8% to 10% this year, which I am appreciative that it will make. Hopefully it'll help us get rid of those damn 1 yen coins that you need for all the 108 yen goods at the 100 yen store at the moment. Make it 110. I prefer not to have all the 1 yen coins to sort of manage that. But even with the increase in the consumption tax, it's not covering the spending of the government at the moment. So again, it's kind of it's a bit of a cheap shot at something which has been very successful with tourism. So it's not clear that how they're going to use the money. But that is coming in, so look out for that. So yes, I'd like to talk about this. This came up the other day, in fact, not 2 days ago. What day did this come up? Now I feel like I have to start again. No, okay. So I missed this when this came up, but let me talk about this. This was posted by the New York Times in December 31, 2018. This only became a topic in Japan that I noticed earlier this week, actually. The editorial board, not a specific editor, this isn't a specific individual comment, this is the editorial board of the New York Times, came up, and where Japan had announced at the end of last year that it was resuming commercial whaling and leaving the IWC, which we all know was, it's complicated. Japan actually goes to the southern oceans. It hunts all sorts of different species of whales, endangered and non-endangered, as part of the scientific whaling program, to basically count and survey the numbers of the different whales, supposedly. They call it, at least that's the scientific purpose of the whaling. As a result, they kill hundreds of whales. The survey is government-sponsored. They need huge ships and so on. The government spent a lot of money sort of keeping this industry on life support. When they announced that they were resuming commercial whaling, ahead of the announcement, they took a lot of trouble, the Japanese government, to go to Australia, to contact Australia and America and explain to them that although it sounds terrible that where everyone is saying stop whaling altogether, what Japan is doing is, by resuming commercial whaling, what they're going to do is they're going to only now do coastal whaling or whaling in the economic area around Japan. They're not going to go to the Southern Ocean or Australia or anything anymore. And as part of commercial whaling quotas, they are not going to hunt, they say, endangered species. And of course, most whale species, or not most, but many of them are not. There are coastal minke whales and whatnot that are not endangered, and actually never have been endangered. There are many species of whales that have been endangered, and it's largely due to whaling. But in spite of the fact that there are species, and the Japanese government, so the proposal means that Japan will be killing less whales, and they'll only be killing them around Japan. And it also means that the government probably won't be subsidizing or sponsoring it anymore, which frankly means, given that no one in Tokyo, no one outside of a few towns with a history of whaling in Japan actually still eat whale meat, and the supposed safety concerns, so on, about whaling, or about whale meat, like for example that it's full of heavy metals and so on. I can sort of see this dying a slow death, frankly, by allowing it to return to commercial whaling. It's actually easier for the Japanese government to let it die off by cutting the subsidies and just and resuming. In a way, less whales are going to die. There are going to be no more endangered whales, so it can sort of be seen as a good thing. However, in spite of the explanations of the Japanese government, probably as you'd expect, all the nations, including the US, which have come out as being committed to being against all forms of whaling, they still have obviously condemned this. And the New York Times editorial board, what they've come out and they have said is, although Japan is in many ways a model global citizen on whaling, they've basically been acting inappropriately. They explain the history of the IWC and how it's basically how they've sort of continued whaling under the guise of scientific whaling, when basically most countries sort of agreed to convert the IWC from being a whaling management organization to a whale conservation organization, and Japan, being out of sync on that intent, basically decided to drop out. So they kind of dismissed the idea that there was ever scientific whaling. They point out that most of the world has moved on, but where they really kind of come down, they basically, there's a few points here which they sort of raised. They said, in the end, the Japanese government's decision to quit the commission is no more than a gambit by nationalist politicians to posture as defenders of the traditional way of life, akin to Trump's defense of coal mining. Well, that's kind of what they've been doing until now. The whole point is they're going to get rid of subsidizing this by doing this, but they know that they won't bring back an industry that has had its day or nobody needs any longer, which largely is true, although there are still towns in Japan that do actually make their populations do live off whaling, including in Abe's own constituency. But I think the main arguments that they make against it are that basically, fewer than 1,000 people are employed by the industry, so basically the industry itself is dying, which again I think they're just going to allow it to die. It's pretty much the way that it's going to work. But they pretty much come down to the idea that there is no justification, commercial, cultural or scientific, for killing these magnificent creatures. So they acknowledge that they're not endangered, but they come back to the idea that it's basically cruel and unnecessary. I still have a problem with this, which is that all meat consumption, is cruel and unnecessary. The idea, we do like to think that our meat is sanitary. Like, I eat meat. I grew up in country towns. I've hunted and I've eaten meat that we've hunted. I'm familiar with the unpleasantness of meat. We think of meat, it's only been within the last 100 years that we've been able to, our societies effectively through industrialized agriculture, we think of meat as something that comes very sterilized, that looks nothing like the animal that it's from, and polystyrene, you know, wrapped sort of cases. I remember when I first went to Spain, and in most ham shops there, you see these legs of ham with still the hair and the skin and the hooves on it, and they cut it in front of you and give you the ham and put it in your sandwich. And I was shocked by that, but then it occurred to me, this is actually, you know, the problems with meat. One, that's where it comes from. You know, the fact that they're allowing me to see it doesn't change the fact that that's what it was. It was an animal. They're just making that connection more visible, and it's really only been the last 100 years or so that people have totally lost that connection when it comes to meat, between the meat itself and where it comes from. And this is perhaps why the shock of sort of you know, the shock of that disconnection, that people, when they make those connections later in life, it's much easier to make the conclusion that it's basically unethical. And this is perhaps why we're seeing many more vegetarian, and I think ultimately that's where the way our species is absolutely going to go. The idea, I don't know, I've seen the PETA videos. I'm familiar with the common malpractices in abattoirs. There's hours of video if you ever go looking for it, you know, and I don't recommend that you do, but at the same time you should know where your food comes from. In terms of, you know, industrialized agriculture, in terms of like emissions, energy consumption, you know, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for the climate, it's you know, we are over 100,000 years of evolution, we do eat meat. And I realize, you know, our bodies are well adapted. We like protein, but at the same time, you know, we have people now rapidly, I think, changing and showing that people can live without it. I like meat and I continue eating it, but there again, what it comes down to me is, as cruel as killing any animal sort of is, in the end of the day, if you were going to choose the life of a very intelligent pig, and we know that pigs are more intelligent than dogs, they're as intelligent by some measures as some forms of apes, and you know, you think about the lives that they have in industrial farms compared to the life of a minke whale. I would choose the life of the minke whale that was killed by a harpoon any day over a pig that was born and raised in an industrial farm that I eat every day. I think in the end of the day, this is all going to disappear, and maybe just within a couple of generations. I think it's been a real rapid move away from this, but I think that the only people in this debate that have the upper hand, who are right, who I will concede to, are the vegans and the vegetarians. I think eating meat and arguing somehow that whales are special and different, as a lot of people do, certainly in my own country they do. This idea that these are magnificent creatures and there's no cultural justification for it. Well, there's no cultural justification for eating pork, for example, if you ask me, or frankly any other kind of farm cow. So they did this, the New York Times, and they put out, again, what typically people that look like me, white people, sort of do, is we put out these sort of missionary colonialist ideas that you need to understand your culture is wrong. And I realize that sounds kind of apologist. At the end of the day, I've said this before, and I think the resumption of whaling is stupid. At least government support for it is stupid. But I think it should be allowed to actually go extinct naturally, which is what the industry is doing anyway, and I think that's the ultimate outcome. So yeah, in any case, the Japanese government felt condemned to, felt compelled, not condemned, they felt compelled to write a response to the New York Times, which they did, in a way that you can be sure pretty much is not going to be accepted or understood by anybody. But this is what they said. Japan, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan wrote to the New York Times, and it was published saying Japan is committed to the conservation of whales. So what they're saying is, it sets catch limits based on methodology established by the AWC, and many whales species are not endangered, and Japan prohibits the hunting of those that are, which technically isn't true. They were hunting endangered species of whales as part of the scientific whaling program, but they've stopped that. So they seem to be saying it's not clear yet exactly what the quotas will be and what sort of whales they're going to allow catching of. But the government seems to be indicating that they will not be allowing hunting of endangered species, at least in the coastal whaling, that they're going to allow with the resumption of commercial whaling. So that's kind of some good news. They point out that this is going to be done around Japan. They point out that the IWC itself has deviated from its original purpose of regulating and supporting commercial whaling, and they point out it's unfair to point out Japan, and incorrect in the idea that it's basically a gambit by nationalist politicians, which it is. I think the New York Times is actually kind of right about that. But at the same time, this is very much what they can't say is that this is actually, I think, the Japanese government, frankly, cutting the whalers loose. It's ironic that by pulling out of the IWC and resuming commercial whaling, frankly, the Japanese government's kind of condemning the whaling industry to death here in Japan, because they're also going to yank the subsidies. So it's kind of good news from the whale's perspective, even though it sounds like the worst news possible. Yes, anyway, that is interesting, and that has been going through this week. At least this response was posted. It's been getting a lot of coverage in Japan anyway, and it makes Japanese at least aware of the fact that what they're doing is basically kind of embarrassing Japan to the rest of the world. And bear in mind that, like when Korea got the same hassle about eating dog meat, although allegedly you can still find it in Korea, the Korean government there moved pretty quick to actually make it illegal. It's kind of funny, Japan's always dug its heels in a bit more over eating whales, yeah, we'll see what happens with this, but I think it's going to die out on its own. Now this is a, I see people talking about game food there. Bears, moose, elk, boars, wild game are popular in Western countries. Yes, I love, gamey sort of deer. Venison is one of my favorite meats, so yes indeed, save the krill. Throw another krill on the barbie. Okay, now this story was some crazy ass stuff. You might recall I've given a few PSA messages on the show in the past about please do not bring your Adderall on the plane, because it is methamphetamine. It's actually legal meth. That's what Adderall and Ritalin is. And if you bring it, somebody was caught importing it into Japan, and they got basically arrested and deported for importing meth. They were basically treated like the Breaking Bad Walter White character. All of these hilarious misunderstandings. Another one's happened where a lady got onto an airplane in America, I believe in Atlanta, was it? And it turned out that she noticed when she was on the airplane, oh geez, golly me, I found I've got a loaded gun in my bag. I totally just forgot to take it out before I went through customs, and somehow they got through customs through the TSA checks in the US. A Delta Airlines flight from Atlanta, so there you go. So she got up in the middle of the flight and told the crew, hey, excuse me, golly gee, I've got a loaded gun, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring it on the plane. Now, I realize in America it could be seen as kind of an innocent mistake. She basically flew all the way to Japan, got to Japan, where it had already been disclosed on the plane that she was carrying a loaded gun. Japanese customs said, yeah, well, she said, this is just a terrible, silly mistake by me, silly me. They said, yeah, pretty silly. Please go back to America, take the gun with you. Where they didn't let her come through customs in Japan, she had to fly back to America. And yeah, most people seem to think, indeed, that she was kind of silly, and this clearly wasn't intentional. She wasn't a terrorist. She wasn't bringing the gun on the plane on purpose. She just inadvertently brought a loaded gun on a plane. If you ask me, personally, my personal opinion, when you look at the prohibited articles that you can't bring onto planes, explosives, drugs, firearms, and you think of all of those things in which, as a passenger, I care about the most, which is the more serious breach? A kilogram of cocaine or a loaded gun? I care less about the kilogram of cocaine. I mean, at the end of the day, every country wants to sort of stop drugs, but do you think if she was accidentally carrying a kilogram of cocaine that they would have just laughed it off as a joke and sent her back to America? Now granted, Americans of course have some really weird ideas about guns, but she carried a loaded gun on a plane. I mean, obviously, number one, I know that the TSA aren't getting paid anymore, but seriously, they make us take our shoes off and dance the hokey pokey. I did this in America, and I don't know, we're supposed to feel safer because we've taken our shoes off and we've danced around in a circle and we've got these huge lines waiting for that. And of all of that, it's great. They took off the shoes, they made her dance around. Did anyone actually ask her about the loaded gun that she was carrying? I mean, how did that even get through? Maybe it's because they're not getting paid because of the government shutdown. And then she gets on the plane, and then it's sort of like, is this normal? Like, how is this normal? This is less normal than, I mean, seriously, if she had showed up in Japan with a kilogram of cocaine, even if she admitted to it, she would have been thrown in jail And I think this person, even if it was a silly, innocent mistake, she should have been thrown into jail at least. So PSA message, please. In addition to your Ritalin and Adderall, make sure you have a prescription for that stuff, a really well-written prescription for it. And loaded guns, please don't bring them on the planes, because anywhere, seriously, like, how anyone could think that was okay. And it's amazing that they just let her get back on the plane back. I'm assuming that she was white. Maybe that's why they let her on the plane in the first place. It's crazy. That's some crazy stuff. American people, please don't do that. The good news is she was denied entry to Japan. Hopefully she never tries to come back again. I mean, seriously, what is wrong with some people? We're coming up on time, but I've got a few more stories. So I talked last week about the radar flap, and I hate to. It gives me no pleasure. I want Korea and Japan to be best friends. I want to be hearing that they did military exercises together, that they're starting economic partnerships, that they're teaming up on this and that. Japan's highest pop, in fact, I think now the Chinese have overtaken the Koreans as the largest foreign group in Japan, but basically, Japan and Koreans are a huge population in Japan. I want Japan and Korea to be friends. They should naturally be friends. There's a ton of Koreans who love Japan, who live in Japan. There's a ton of Japanese with ties to Korea, some that live in Korea, a bunch of businesses over there. And I want everything to be good, and it's always really frustrating when things go bad, but things just are relentlessly bad, and it's because of history, it's because of politics. And I mentioned last week that we had this big thing about the radar flap, about the fire control radar being aimed. Basically, they locked missiles on a Japanese patrol plane in the Japanese EEZ. And this has been going. I put this cutout video online, and all the trolls sort of came out and from both sides and started commenting all over it. But the whole point is that this is probably in Japan, frankly, poking the bear on this. Although, frankly, their own bear was kind of poked with the radar missile lock. Part of this was of course there's been this decision which I mentioned last week recently in the Korean courts for the first time to recognize the ability of individual Korean citizens to bring claims for unpaid wages from conscripted labor during World War II that was given to up to something like 90 different Japanese companies that were used for war production by the Japanese government when of course Korea was part of Japan. The 1965 treaty between Korea and Japan, as I mentioned before, $500 million was given to Korea by Japan. Basically, there was an adding up of all the stuff which Japan paid for, the construction of infrastructure in Japan, or the Japanese government assets in Korea that were taken over by the new South Korean government. Those were offset from the total weight of claims that South Korea felt that it could make against Japan for destruction and oppression and suppression of Korean society. And the agreement of the 1965 treaty was that the payment made by Japan to Korea in 1965 of $500 million, so that was a lot of money, at least at that time, was in settlement of all claims relating to the colonization of Korea and the war period. And based on that principle, even though there have always been claims and complaints by individuals and by people ever since Japan and Korea have had diplomatic relations, the Korean government and the courts have always recognized that the treaty doesn't allow individuals to make claims relating to World War II against Japanese companies. The idea is that the Korean government got all the compensation from Japan, and the Korean government took the money and rather than compensate individual people decided to put it investing into infrastructure and developing of the Korean economy, which realized the Korean economic miracle that we see. But the result is that you have many elderly people who are destitute who never got compensated for this. They never got their wages that they were arguably owed from World War II. And the money that was paid to settle all of those claims was paid from the Japanese government to the Korean government. So Japan's position is that to the extent that such claims exist and are held to be valid, it's the responsibility of the Korean government to resolve it, since Japan's worked that out country to country. However, the Supreme Court in Korea has found that it would be unconscionable to prohibit these old people from being able to make claims against these existing Japanese companies, such as Nippon Steel, which have operations and assets in Korea. So they basically allowed, for the first time ever, they recognized, again, with two companies, and now there's probably going to be a whole bunch more, that the former workers in these companies can claim back wages from these companies. The Japanese government has said to those companies, don't pay, because if you pay, that's going to mess everything up for all the other companies that could face the same claims. It's the Korean government's responsibility to resolve these claims, and we want to push them to do this. So Nippon Steel hasn't paid these people, even though they only got like not a huge amount, like $50,000, $60,000 each or something, kind of a negligible amount in the big picture. But they haven't paid them. So the South Korean Supreme Court this week granted an asset seizure order, where basically now the Korean government and the court can go and confiscate the assets of Japanese companies operating in South Korea in order to cash them in to get the money for the compensation for these individuals. Which is to say, now the Korean government is going to be in a position of enforcing the court's order to go and basically confiscate and seize the assets of Japanese companies and to grab compensation for these World War II victims. When that happened, and the Japanese government sort of said, hey, this is a violation of the treaty, you guys agreed that you were going to take care of this. Moon, the president of South Korea, made a statement warning the Japanese government that, look, and we have a separation of government and courts in Korea, and we all have to respect the courts. We can't tell the courts what to do. So we all have to work with this and negotiate this out. So please don't inflame people's passions. That makes this more difficult to resolve. Is what Moon sort of said. But again, the Japanese side has said is basically it's the Korean government's responsibility to legislate or to take whatever actions are necessary to protect these Japanese companies from these claims, which obviously is going to be an extremely unpopular thing for the South Korean government to do if they do that. But yes, this was all seen coming, and knowing that this is definitely partly why Japan decided to make a big fuss about the fire radar thing, because they've got a lot of complaints with the South Korean government at the moment, and the South Korean government, which is currently going through a bunch of corruption scandals and is trying to patch things up with North Korea. It's good PR basically to not compromise with Japan. Compromising with Japan in a situation like this, especially where the Japanese government is seen as provoking Korean emotions by saying, screw you, we're not giving you any compensation, you guys have been paid all your money, which most Korean people don't believe, because of course the compensation deal was kept secret from the Korean people until only about 5 years ago. So again, really difficult issue to resolve. And just to add to it, North Korea made a statement yesterday saying, you know what, we're not going to solve the abductee issue. If you keep talking about the abductee issue, we're going to raise the war labor issue as well. And this in itself, this is another interesting point. North Korea is entitled to compensation. It hasn't been paid compensation. When Koizumi went to North Korea in 2002 and he offered out the carrot to the North Koreans saying, we can give you a package like we gave South Korea in 1965, diplomatic recognition and a whole bunch of economic aid, but we're not going to do that unless you resolve the abductees issue. And in response to that, Kim Jong-il released 8 abductees, and he said that's it, and they kind of released a whole bunch of paperwork which looked like it was all made in the same place at the same time, saying these were the abductees, these ones are dead, these ones are alive, we're going to let them go out for a short time but keep their families here and pull them back so they don't stay out there and they don't say anything bad about us, which got screwed up. The Japanese government abducted their abductees back and forced North Korea to hand over their families and get them out of North Korea. And from the Japanese perspective, North Korea admitted to the abductee issue and it didn't adequately account for it. So they've been saying since 2002, hey, look, the offer remains on the table. We'll give you diplomatic relations and compensation, but you've got to come totally clean on the abductee issue and release all the remaining abductees that you have. And North Korea said, no, we've resolved it. There's nothing else to talk about. But it's kind of funny. So they're kind of, on the one hand, teaming up with South Korea, bashing on Japan about the war labor issue. But the point is, unlike South Korea that's already been compensated, North Korea actually is entitled, and Japan is made out. I mean, from my perspective, it doesn't really make sense from North Korea's perspective not to hand back some octogenarian Japanese abductees. Why would you even hesitate, given that the other ones are already out? So the fact that North Korea doesn't resolve this issue, given the potential payout that it would be entitled to if it established diplomatic relations, doesn't make sense. But this claim is valid, but frankly, the whole point of releasing and resolving the abductee issue is that North Korea can still make these claims. And obviously, if they wanted to drive a wedge between Japan and South Korea, or especially Japan and America, Japan suddenly paying a whole bunch of money to North Korea would be pretty effective at that. It's also probably because of that they realize that probably any concession now wouldn't be rewarded, which is also probably why they're not releasing or making any progress on the abductee issue. But certainly if things go badly with South Korea, which doesn't look likely because Moon needs a bit of a win at the moment, yeah, it's totally possible that this could open up again. And from my perspective, I've dated North Korean citizens in Japan. There are a lot of North Koreans here, and they're perfectly normal people. And they're a big community in Japan. I mean, they're regular people that just happen to have citizenship, from when the Civil War happened in South Korea, that it links them to that country. And, in the end of the day can't come soon enough that North Korea can normalize and integrate with the rest of the world. But, again, all of these issues are so complicated and tangled up, and this is another dimension of it. And of course, there's more, as I talked about last week. Man, we've got so many stories this week. We're already over time. I'm going to try to zip through these. So Ghosn basically, he made a filing to the courts to basically end his detention. He's already been detained for questioning for like more than 2 months, and he made a really strong sort of case defending himself in the Tokyo District Court, which rejected his appeal that he's gone back into detention. They've added new charges. This has been dragging on, and it's been a pretty... the French government, which is a major shareholder of Renault, of which Ghosn is the CEO, and also the major shareholder of Nissan, they've made it clear that they're not happy with this, and they see this as a political attempt by Nissan to sort of try to get rid of Ghosn. And the French government has indicated in the past that they've approached this diplomatically because this affects them as the government as a major stakeholder in this dispute, and they've come to Japan and they've talked about this, and Renault's been basically told, no, we're not going to do a special shareholders meeting by Nissan. The French government's kind of been ignored. And so then this happened this week. The head of the Japanese Olympic Committee has been charged by French courts with corruption in connection with the Tokyo 2020 Olympic bid, where basically it appears that the Japan Olympic Committee for Tokyo paid a $2.5 million consulting fee to the father of one of the IOC delegates that got to decide which city wins the Olympics. And the argument is that this was a consulting fee for advice on preparing the bid for Tokyo to make the best possible bid. But what better way to get advice and to prepare for a bid than paying $2 million to the dad of one of the people voting? This was known and investigated a couple of years ago, admittedly by the Japan Olympic Committee itself, which thoroughly investigated itself and found itself completely innocent and exonerated itself. So that was that. Again, Nissan turned in Ghosn, whereas in the Olympic Committee case, although this was known and it was seen as being dodgy and dirty and it was public news, in the end of the day, apparently the Japanese Olympic Committee exonerating itself seemed to be good enough for everybody. However, the investigation has continued in France for a long time. Now bear in mind, this is a payment made to Singapore from Japan. I don't think there's actually a connection, other than the fact that the IOC, I think, has headquarters in France, so I think it's that connection that they've pursued this investigation. But for whatever reason, they've decided at exactly this moment that now is the right time to indict the head of the Japan Olympic Committee for corruption associated with the Japanese 2020 Olympics. Clearly, a lot of people were suggesting they're trying to set up a prisoner swap situation. The problem being that, of course, this chap, Mr. Takeda, the president of the Japan Olympic Committee, is not actually in detention. He's just been charged. He's voluntarily cooperating with the authorities and questioning over there. But there is certainly a view, even expressed in news and by politicians here, that this appears to be a tactic by the French to sort of put pressure, sort of a revenge tactic for the arrest of Ghosn, which is possible. That certainly is the superficial appearance of it, although the French insist this is part of an investigation that's been going on for a long time, and indeed the story has been up in the past, but certainly it looks very, very convenient. And certainly, even though the way that even the NHK reported this is that this has been investigated and it was found that there was no illegality, which is to say, yeah, we don't think it's illegal to pay the dad of one of the delegates $2 million in consulting fees. I'm sure they got good value for money. I guess that's going to be part of the investigation. But the fact that they exonerated themselves, yeah, it never quite played out. I mean, the thing is, obviously, if this is the case, this wouldn't be the first. I mean, FIFA, the Olympics, they're basically junkets. And corruption is an associated part of these things, and it's entirely unsurprising that there's sort of a payment if it happened to happen. I mean, they admit to the payment, they're just saying that it wasn't corrupt in nature. Yes, to me, the best outcome of this, frankly, Tokyo didn't really want the Olympics anyway. I mean, hell, France can probably go ahead and take them. As far as I'm concerned, Japan's already done all the upgrades and the tourism and so on associated with the Olympics. It'd actually be an ideal outcome if they then didn't actually have to host them. But who knows? In any case, it's interesting. Carlos Ghosn did give a statement. I'm not currently logged in with this. I could read it all out, but basically he went through trying to explain basically each one of the points of the indictment, and saying that he is an innocent man like Billy Joel, and he tried to explain each one of the elements of doubt against him, although again they keep adding more and more charges against him, so it looks like he could be in detention, his lawyers are saying, for another 6 months, which is kind of insane actually. A scary time to be a multi-hundred-million-dollar international corporation CEO at the moment in Japan, but certainly, I mean, it's shining a light on the conditions that Japanese people also have to go through in this sort of situation. So yes, certainly, who knows if this is a political move back, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens. It certainly is very embarrassing for the Japan side. I mean, it's reminiscent of the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics. We'll see what happens. Again, there might not be very much that's possible to do about this, but it does look quite convenient, at least the timing that they decided to proceed with the corruption charges. Only a couple of stories left. One is that NHK apparently did a science show where they featured, basically it's a family show where they showed, the science experiments and whatnot. They filmed at a particular set, which apparently you can use for recording, that exists somewhere in Tokyo. I don't know where this exists, but this is the most famous pool in Japan. If you want to know why this pool is famous, you may recall the story of the grotto at the Playboy Mansion, where a major outbreak of Legionnaire's disease happened in Los Angeles a couple of years ago. And it turned out that all the people who had Legionnaire's disease apparently had caught it from this pool, from the spa pool at the Playboy Mansion. Now, I'm not saying that that pool behind those two lovely NHK presenters has Legionnaire's disease in it, but if any pool in Tokyo does, that's probably the one that has it, and apparently they swam in it. Now that pool is apparently Japan's a small country, so apparently whenever any adult film wants to film in any setting involving a pool, that's like the only pool in Japan that gives permission. So basically this is the most well-known pool in Japan. Yes, NHK thought it would be a really good idea to film it at this location, which I just thought was kind of funny. Oh god, we're way over time, and okay, how many stories? I think that's it. There's 2 more stories. 24, that's how long the show's going to go for. Japan is making a Japanese version of 24, which the Japanese comments reacting to it basically are, why would we do that? Why? I mean, for a start, we're not allowed to use guns, are we? Like, how would they even do this? Why would we? Why is Japanese TV making a remake? Just show us the original. We prefer that. Okay, it's just going to be Johnny's people. Oh no, this is so stupid. The Japan one's just going to be absolutely stupid. I think that they should start this. It's going to be really strange, showing all the sort of different incidents that they have in the US shows. I guess they're going to have to use lots of CG for that. 24時間でという無理があるのに、それに日本版ってなんて So it's already generally impossible to do anything in 24 hours, let alone in Japan. But yes, basically all the Japanese people saying that seems like a really stupid idea, but they're doing it, so that'll be really interesting. I guess they're going to call it Nijiyong. And the final story this week, oh man, this is late, but I'm going to say this, is the story NGT. I don't like these, and I don't like this story, but oh man, what this is. So the idol industry in Japan, basically Japan has its own pop idol industry, just like other countries, and it's basically very similar in the sense that it's basically the idea of selling these idealized, I mean, on the one hand they're selling music, but they're combining it with the idea of selling the idea of accessibility to these idealized people that the music companies try to cash in on. And the Akimoto, the company that runs AKB48 and all the spin-off groups of that, including this NGT Yamaguchi, or that's her name, Yamaguchi, so NGT48, basically has, over time we've seen this kind of, in all forms of pop culture, that found this way of trying to figure out the thing that works and get it down into a more and more finely drilled, purified, money-making version of the last thing. And probably the epitome of this kind of pop culture and the emerging of this idea of both selling music and selling the dream and fantasy of being close to these idol women. The person who's been the most successful, this company has been the most successful at taking it there. Typically they pick people who are young and underage, still generally basically, so they don't have to pay them so much. They do the contracts with their parents. They deliberately want to make them appear accessible by, one, they strictly prohibit them having any relationships. They keep really tight control of them in dorms. They basically they pick women in Japan. The idea is, I know that in most countries, when you want to pick an idealized pop star that you want to build up, they become these really appealing through their talent. They're like the best singers, the best dancers, and they really woo everybody with how great they are. In Japan, the idea is that it's really intimidating if you're too perfect. So they try to pick people who are not perfect, and by deliberately having them not dance too well and not sing too well, in order to seem more like they could be someone that you would actually meet. And so they basically, Japan's got this whole spectrum. When we think of paying for a woman in Western countries, or pretty much anywhere in the world that I know of outside of Japan, I think the concept that people just assume is you're just paying for sex straight up, and there's no real spectrum. You're either watching monster truck racing and eating popcorn at home, or you're having sex, and there's no sort of in between on that spectrum. The Japanese economy has been, for a long time, has somehow figured out pretty well how to bridge that gap between like all the different nuances, from full-on sex to sort of quasi-sex to sort of almost sex to sort of paying a girl to pour you drinks, the kabakura industry, which is just conversation and drinks but with an attractive woman who's paying you attention for a period of time that you pay a lot of money for. And that's an area where it becomes really close to the pop industry, where they're selling CDs on the idea that somehow you might meet them. And what the idol industry in Japan does is it tries to bridge the gap between the kabakura, the hostess bars, and the and selling music by basically using the music CDs as like tickets, that the more of these that you buy, the more rights that you get to come and spend time with these women at meet and greets that they do around the country, where you can meet them and you can talk to them one-on-one, or you get to vote in competitions about which one gets sort of prizes and stuff like that. So the idea is that they actually use the CDs, which are generally terrible, as a way of paying for access to these women. And so these women are kind of kept all pure. They're generally legally underage. They're not allowed to talk to, they're not allowed to have boyfriends or access to men. They'll get fired if they do. And frankly, it's very, very much like a non-sex, but very much like human trafficking and prostitution. And it's really, to me, really creepy and unethical. Well, there's two problems I have with it. One is creepy and unethical, and it's basically like pimping out underage girls for a lot of money. I mean, the economic model, nationwide they sell these CDs, so it's like having a kabakura where you have like every desperate man in the country buying dozens of copies of the same CD. So they figured out this way to make people buy multiple copies of the same terrible CD. That's one success. And this idea to run a kabakura basically based on having 48 girls and having everyone in the country participate. So they're rolling in money, and they roll in this money by making people think that they've got a chance with these girls. And frankly, they don't really do a lot to look after. You hear all these terrible stories about these sort of companies. So this story came up this week that, again, as happens, the internet trolls are basically, they're always going through trying to find out any information they can about these girls. And apparently the personal information, including the residence, the location of where this girl Yamaguchi from NGT48 lives, leaked onto the internet, and two guys thought, well, let's go pay her a visit because we live near there. And they went to her house, knocked on the door, pushed the way into the genkan of their place when she told them to go away. One of them grabbed her face and assaulted her, and she filed complaints with the police, but apparently and told her company do something about this, improve the security and get these guys. The production company, for whatever reason, well, when it all happened, the production company did nothing about it, and the police decided not to push charges, which is, it's not clear, but it appears that the music company probably didn't want to make any sort of fuss about this because they don't want to give the idea that they're hostile toward the fans. These fans broke into her house, two of them, and assaulted her. But even then, the company didn't do shit for her, even when she went to them for protection. So she decided she was going to more or less sort of It was a cry for help at a concert. She suddenly, in the middle of a concert, stopped and said to everybody she wants to apologize for the trouble that she's causing by raising the fact that she was assaulted by two creeps who broke into her house. And she phrased it as an apology, but obviously this was kind of a passive way of frankly telling everybody, hey, I've been assaulted and no one's doing anything to help me. It was a cry for help. The music company reacted to this by cancelling all the group's concerts. They seem to have punished the group for it. So, you know, the online thing, there's already a lot of online discussion about just how creepy and wrong this whole thing, this whole industry, frankly, is to start with, and how mistreated the girls in it are. But on top of it, the fact that one of them went through this, and, you know, we don't know everything that happened to her necessarily, but this is kind of terrible. And then the one, you know, frankly, the pimp that's supposed to save them in the situation, frankly, tried to brush it up and may have worked with the police. It's not really clear. But the point is that this is just terrible, and it resulted in the situation where she sort of came out in public that this happened, and then her whole group's been kind of shut down as a result. So pretty awful. I mean, almost as bad as the music. I'm as offended by the quality of the music itself and the terrible dancing as I am. There was this fantastic competition a couple of months ago where they had all the top idol groups in Korea and Japan, like, do a dual concert. And the thing about Korea, and as opposed to Japan pop music, they started out being very similar. The Korean pop music is not like the Japan girl next door thing. They are full on boot camp. They become very good at dancing, very good at singing. I've talked with commercial songwriters and so on, and they talk about how, like, the Koreans are, like, serious. Like, they really try to be the best in the world at dancing, best in the world at singing. They really take the songwriting seriously. In Japan, they deliberately sort of dumb it down. This is why SMAP has Nakai in it. You know, it means that every harmony is always slightly off key because they don't want everyone to sound too good and intimidate the easily intimidated Japanese audience. So when they had this thing with these Korean idols dancing off against these Japan idols, the Koreans are like, you know, like a dance troupe in perfect locked synchronicity, and the Japanese girls were sort of out of tune and flopping around stage. And apparently this was like broadcast all over Asia, and everyone was completely shocked. So it's bad in every way. I don't know, to me this kind of lays bare just how terrible this industry is and why people just have to stop supporting it. But and certainly I hope that the police properly look into it and deal with a pretty disturbing case of assault. That was a long show. Those are all the stories this week. I am going to be back next week. Look out on this Friday, January 18 at 11 p.m. Japan Standard Time, so basically 1 hour ago from now. 30 minutes after the show normally starts, I'm going to be doing Wycombe Japan with Radri. Look out for probably next week. I'll probably have a schedule set up for when the new season 3 of Japan Business Time After Work Edition with Rochelle Kopp is going to be going live, so look forward to that. And I'm going to set them up as watch parties so we can watch, talk, and I will join you in the comments watching them together. That's going to be awesome. There will of course be this show. Plus, as I said, to make the show more watchable, because this is terribly long, I'm going to cut out segments of this and post them during the week so that you can watch them and share them with your friends. Why not? If you like the show, please remember to like, because it does motivate me, and I do want to try to get everything up and running a bit better this year and get the channel growing a little bit again. So appreciate the support, and certainly look forward to seeing some more videos through the week. I'll try to post about 3. We'll see how it goes. And see you again, same bat time, same bat channel, in the comments next week, and thank you for joining. Yes, she's in Taisu. I've seen little bits and pieces of the comments. And this is the fun part actually about cutting the videos and watching them later, was I noticed the comments a lot more that way, and I get the feeling that I am going to have a great time reading the comments. So thank you again to all the commenters, and I'm sorry I've got so much stuff to get through tonight, so I didn't get to interact so much, but again, come back, see you again next week, and boom, peace. Ending show awkwardly.